For more than a decade, documentaries and popular science coverage told the exact same story about the most famous dinosaur skeleton on Earth. Sue, the most complete Tyrannosaurus rex ever discovered, likely died a slow, undignified death, felled not by another predator but by a common parasite that ate through the back of her jaw until she could no longer eat or drink. It was a clean, memorable explanation, the kind that turns a massive apex predator into a sympathetic, almost tragic figure, and it was repeated so often across so many platforms that it hardened into accepted fact well before anyone had actually tested it properly. In 2022, a team of scientists finally went back and checked it directly against the physical evidence. It fell apart almost immediately. Sue was discovered on August 12, 1990, near Faith, South Dakota, by fossil hunter Sue Hendrickson, and remains, to this day, one of the largest, most complete, and best preserved Tyrannosaurus rex skeletons ever recovered, now housed permanently at the Field Museum in Chicago. The skeleton measures roughly 40.5 feet long, and bone growth analysis indicates Sue lived to approximately 33 years old, an unusually long lifespan for the species, one that left behind an equally unusual amount of physical evidence about the injuries and hardships that animals survived along the way, evidence paleontologists have continued studying and reinterpreting for more than 3 decades since the skeleton was first pulled from the ground. Among those injuries, one specific set of marks became the subject of debate for decades. 8 distinct holes, some as wide as a golf ball, punched through the back half of Sue's left lower jawbone. Similar holes have since been documented in several other Tyrannosaurus specimens as well, including another well-known T-Rex fossil recovered from Montana, meaning whatever caused them was not unique to Sue alone, and was instead some kind of recurring pattern worth explaining across the species as a whole. The explanation that eventually dominated the conversation arrived in 2009, when paleontologist Ewan Wolfe, working with Stephen Salisbury, Jack Horner, and David Varicchio, published a study surveying tyrannosaurid fossils specifically for this kind of damage. Their team identified 10 individual specimens carrying matching lesions, smooth-edged, full-thickness holes concentrated in the same region of the lower jaw across every case examined, a level of consistency that made the pattern look genuinely diagnostic, rather than coincidental. Wolfe's team proposed these holes were caused by trichomonosis, an infection still seen today in birds of prey, caused by a single-celled parasite called Trichomonas. In severe cases, the infection creates a spreading lesion at the back of the mouth that can eventually block the throat entirely, preventing the animal from swallowing food at all. In the study, Wolfe compared the shape and placement of the T-Rex lesions directly against modern infected birds, including hawks and falcons, and found what looked like a strong match between the two. The implication, stated plainly by the research team at the time, was that Sue may have ultimately died from this exact condition, unable to feed herself as the infection slowly closed off her throat over a period of declining health. The story was irresistible, and it spread accordingly. A predator capable of crushing bone with roughly 8,000 pounds of bite force, brought down not by claws or teeth, but by a microscopic parasite still found in ordinary pigeons today. It appeared in documentaries, museum signage, and popular science coverage for over a decade, treated as one of the more satisfying solved mysteries in dinosaur paleontology. The comparison itself seemed to check out on the surface. Trichomonas infections in modern birds of prey are well documented, and the general region of jaw damage lined up closely enough with what Wolfe's team had measured in the fossil record that few researchers pushed back at the time. Nobody went back to directly test the comparison against a real infected specimen sitting in a real museum collection until more than 10 years later. If you're finding this interesting, be sure to subscribe to understand more DNA from the past. That test came from researcher Bruce Rothschild, a physician and paleopathologist affiliated with the Carnegie Museum of Natural History, working with Field Museum paleontologist Jingmai O'Connor, bioarchaeologist Stacy Drake, and anthropologist Maria Cecilia Lozada, publishing their findings in the journal Cretaceous Research in 2022. Their approach was straightforward in a way that made the earlier gap in the research genuinely surprising. Locate an actual bird specimen with confirmed trichomonosis and compare its jaw damage directly against zoos rather than relying on general visual resemblance the way the original study had. O'Connor worked with the Field Museum's own bird collection, staffed by an assistant collections manager who specifically tracks avian disease history, and located a specimen with a documented case of the infection that had been sitting in storage the entire time this debate had been running in the scientific literature. By the researchers' own account, this was the first time anyone had actually gone back and made that direct physical comparison. The comparison did not hold up. The infected bird's damage showed a different pattern entirely, concentrated in soft tissue at the back of the throat rather than punching clean through solid bone the way Sue's lesions did. As O'Connor put it afterward, one confirmed case of trichomonosis in the collection showed clear signs of infection, but nothing resembling holes bored straight through the jaw itself. The second half of the study delivered the more significant reversal, and it is the detail that actually settles the question rather than simply casting doubt on the earlier answer. Researchers examined the bone directly surrounding each of Sue's 8 lesions and found clear evidence of healing, small spurs of new bone growth, the same kind of repair process seen in other healed fractures throughout the animal kingdom, and strikingly similar to healing patterns the team documented around trepanation holes, ancient surgical openings cut into human skulls by Inca healers in Peru centuries ago, used as a direct comparison point for what genuine bone healing looks like around a hole of similar size and depth. That comparison across such different species and such different time periods was deliberate, since bone healing follows broadly similar biological rules across vertebrates, regardless of species. That healing is the detail that overturns the original conclusion entirely. An infection severe enough to be actively closing off an animal's throat, as the 2009 hypothesis proposed, would not leave behind evidence of active bone repair around the wound site, since that kind of infection typically kills before healing has any real chance to begin, let alone enough time for visible new bone growth to form around the damaged area. Whatever caused these holes did not kill Sue in the moment they were created. She survived long enough afterward for her body to begin repairing the damage on its own. Subscribe to not miss the next one. With the infection theory ruled out, Rothschild proposed a different explanation. Physical trauma, specifically claw marks potentially inflicted during combat or courtship behavior involving another Tyrannosaurus, one animal mounting or grappling with another closely enough for claws to strike the back of the jaw directly. It remains, by the researcher's own account, a hypothesis rather than a settled conclusion, and it is not one that even O'Connor, his own co-author on the paper, fully accepts. O'Connor has said on the record that she does not think the claw mark explanation makes sense, pointing out that the holes appear only in the back portion of the jaw rather than in the scattered individual gouge pattern a genuine claw strike would likely leave, and that real bite marks would typically appear as a row of aligned punctures rather than isolated, randomly placed holes. She has said openly that other explanations may still be on the table that nobody has proposed yet. 2022 did not close this case. It reopened it, this time on far more solid footing than the theory it replaced, with the researchers who solved the first half of the mystery still actively disagreeing about the second half. What makes this correction particularly significant is how commonly this kind of damage actually appears across the species. Roughly 15% of known Tyrannosaurus rex specimens show these same jaw lesions, according to the research team's own accounting, meaning this was never a freak, one-time injury unique to a single unlucky animal. Whatever process was actually responsible was widespread enough to leave a mark on a meaningful fraction of every T-Rex skeleton ever recovered from the ground, which makes the explanation matter far beyond Sue's individual case alone. A cause this repeatable across multiple specimens, multiple excavation sites, and multiple points across the species' several million-year existence points towards something built into the ordinary risks of simply being a Tyrannosaurus rex. Whether that turns out to be intraspecific combat, mating behavior, or some other recurring physical stress, researchers have not yet fully identified a detail that changes how the entire species should be understood rather than just one famous individual. The correction also matters for a reason that goes beyond this one animal. For over a decade, an appealing, easily repeatable story filled the space where an actual answer should have been. And it did so specifically because nobody had directly tested it against the comparison it depended on. The 2009 hypothesis was not reckless or careless science. It was a reasonable inference drawn from a visual resemblance, published in good faith by researchers working with the tools and comparative data available to them at the time. And it held up as the leading explanation for exactly as long as no one checked it against a real infected specimen sitting in the very same museum collection where Sue herself now stands on permanent display. Once that direct comparison was finally made, more than a decade after the original claim first entered the scientific literature, the explanation did not survive contact with the evidence. What remains true about Sue after this correction is this. She lived to roughly 33 years old, a documented outlier for a species whose members typically died in their late 20s at most, carrying 8 distinct wounds through the back of her jaw that had already begun healing by the time she died. Wounds that were never caused by the parasite science spent over a decade crediting for her death. What actually caused them is, as of now, still unknown, an open question sitting inside the jawbone of one of the most extensively studied dinosaur skeletons ever recovered. The most complete Tyrannosaurus rex ever found has spent more than 3 decades teaching paleontology, one confirmed answer after another, from her age at death to the healing patterns preserved in her bones. And it took this one specific mystery, sitting in plain sight the entire time, to prove that even a fossil this thoroughly studied can still be hiding an answer nobody has actually found yet.